What do these things have in common? Bank robbery, idealistic teens, a train station, betrayal. The lead singer and bass player in the first American band to perform in Kazakhstan. Alien abduction. The FBI. Super secret governmental clearances. MJ-12. Assassinations. Accusations of espionage. For the answer to this question and more, stay tuned for the next hour. In other words, don't touch that dial. Greetings and welcome to The World According to Pleiades on KFUG Radio in Crescent City, California, 101.1 FM. The 1-hour weekly radio program that covers everything from alternative medicine, hypnosis, meditation, success, human interaction, alien abduction, and the question of what is reality anyway, to name but a few. Don Depp, successful bank robber, self-identified revolutionary, once accused of being a spy for East Germany, lead singer and bass player for the first American band to perform in Kazakhstan, and much, much more. Don Depp has also investigated the infamous MJ-12, along with interviewing Dan Burisch of the same organization, and as such has been the subject of CIA probes and will undoubtedly be under surveillance for the rest of his life. Don Depp, welcome back for part 4 of the Don Depp interviews. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule, especially during this holiday season, to join us once again on The World According to Pleiades. Now, we've been touching on a lot of different subjects, and we spoke a little before this interview began about where you'd like to begin. As always, I want you to begin wherever you like, and wherever that flow takes you will be absolutely perfect. Don Depp, welcome back.
And thank you, Pleiades, for having me back. Thank you for the opportunity to help your audience get a little bit more accustomed to the secret reality behind the reality that they think they know. I was talking to you last week about several things that I wanted to clean up. Number one is this project, Preserve Destiny. I did speak about Sergeant Dan Sherman and his book, Above Black, Project Preserve Destiny. And then I mentioned that Dan Burisch, as I found out later, was also involved in the same Project Preserve Destiny. It's a very large program that was involved with a number of different programs, sub-programs, operations that were concerned with continuing the human race beyond the cataclysms that we're about to undergo. And these cataclysms happen every approximately 3,657 years when we have a passage of the planet known as Nibiru through our skies, and that is scheduled to happen. Actually, it's overdue, some would say. And it will be happening shortly enough. But the important thing is that enough people on this earth know about it. They have every right to know about it so that they can take steps themselves. And heretofore, Majestic 12 has been the one that has been keeping this information to themselves, doing what they felt was necessary to prepare at least some of the population, meaning those people that were either rich enough or through individual merit had come to the attention of the authorities, namely Majestic 12, so that they could secure a place on board one of the arcs that were supposedly being built, or one of the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases that have been built. Any one of a number of projects that were concerned with making sure that a certain number of humans would survive. Now, a certain number of humans always survive every pole shift. But in this particular instance, this Project Preserve Destiny was concerned on the one hand in Dan Sherman's environment with making sure that all humans that were taken off planet by our alien visitors that we had allegedly signed treaties with would be returned without damage. Even if they had genetic material removed from them, they had to have done so by their own subconscious voluntary will. That was Sergeant Dan Sherman's role. He was a type of telepathic messenger who would record the coordinates and so forth of those humans that were supposedly taken. He was also able to communicate telepathically, which was itself one of the most valuable functions in a world that will be left bereft of all forms of electronic communication such as we're now accustomed to. Although shortwave radio will go a long ways towards helping alleviate that, the fact is that most humans will not be able to communicate at long distance like we can do now. It will be really a return to the Stone Age. Now, another aspect of Project Preserve Destiny was preserving, as I mentioned, the human race. There's some of members of the human race that were rich enough, and as such, this Project Lotus, the Lotus Protocol, was an order that Dan Burisch had been given to develop, utilizing the so-called God particle, or the Ganesh particle, as he dubbed it, that supposedly was the basis for the Tree of Life, the Fountain of Youth. It would reverse aging. And, of course, this is what all of the old-timers in Majestic 12, those that are still alive and kicking or squirming, as the case might be, and they would certainly love to be able to escape the pole shift and not through natural death. They would like to be here and watch it and then survive to live as a king in the aftertime or as a group of kings. So this side of Project Preserve Destiny that Dan Burisch was involved with was created and concerned with this Ganesh particle. And as Dan was able to find out, or so he claims, he was able to isolate within the electromagnetic river, as he called it, three different types of particles, one of which was the Ganesh particle. And this Ganesh particle, once it was put into a framework or utilized with a blueprint known as the Lotus, would be used in the future. Supposedly it would be found in the year 2091, according to what the Project Looking Glass had told them. And that individual, who would be a grandchild of an individual that's alive today, would go on to interpret the Lotus Protocol and be able to use it in that time, which is supposedly after the earth has been cleansed of all of the selfish and evil types that have been polluting our world spiritually, so that humankind can go on to live in the future. Now, many people will disagree and dispute that. In fact, I'm one of them, because I don't think that this was anything but another form of bamboozlement of the elite. Just like the selfish aliens, they told Majestic 12, which was largely military men, back in 1947, when they'd recovered that craft at Roswell, they told them what they wanted to hear. Now, Roswell itself was not a crash that was created or staged by these selfish aliens, but rather the first one that they had taken control of, the possession of, allegedly by the omnipotent Krill, and later on in the 1950s had signed an agreement with Majestic 12 under Eisenhower's voluntarily agreeing to do this, and their whole point was to give them technology. At least Majestic 12 believed they were getting technology that would allow them to rule the world, that they would be able to have these flying machines and go cruising around the skies at thousands of miles an hour, making right-hand turns, and being able to deploy all forms of fantastic weapons, such as they like to dream of being able to play around with, and that eventually they would control the world or dominate it, so that whatever they wanted to happen in the post-pole ship world, they'd be able to do it. Well, that was not going to be allowed to be the case, as they found out. And as the time wore on, these selfish aliens gave them these flying saucers, and I guess a total of 9 of them, which is a very important number. It's a sacred number to the Zeta Reticuli. But allegedly 9 of them were hauled off to Area 51. There were 9 hangar bays that were arranged for them. Now, one of them was simply too large that Majestic had to end up having it buried. So that wasn't going to go anywhere. But they had enough that they could have, if they had been given the secret of propulsion, been allowed to course through the skies and play God. But the entire point was, sure, they were given these craft, but they were never to be allowed to know how to use them. They were never to be allowed to know the secret of free energy, so long as they themselves were here on this earth, spiritually polluting this world, which is currently a schoolhouse, and it is an equal opportunity for souls to choose right and wrong. And I think I covered that in the previous interviews. But to get back to what I'm talking about with Project Preserve Destiny, and the same thing going on with the Ganesh particle and the Lotus Protocol was just another form of bamboozling of the most supreme, highest level, just as the emperor who wore no clothes, in a similar fashion, these aliens were able to bamboozle the human power elite into thinking that they too would be able to fly around the skies like that. They too would be able to reverse aging and live long, almost immortal lives, because that is what many people would like to do, given their druthers and given the means to do it. So the point is, they were not going to be allowed to, and they still haven't. And they've taken those flying saucers out of Area 51 and crawled off to the Utah desert with their tail between their legs and had to keep those flying saucers there without being able to do what they wanted to do originally. The Ganesh particle has been cast in disrepute by members of the group that I have been working with, the Golden Thread, and after they had physically gone to visit with Dr. Burisch and witnessed it supposedly being in action and under the microscope. That's a whole story in and of itself. Maybe another time I'll give the details on that. But, there's a lot of stories like that. But the important point is that Project Preserve Destiny was a commitment on the part of the human power elite, Majestic 12, and later on the Committee of Majority, to allow for a certain number of humans, mainly of their own choosing, to survive the pole shift event and to make sure that humanity did not die off. Now, humanity will not die off, but this current model of humanoid that we know as Homo sapiens is destined for the dustbin. It's simply the way of progress. The next version that will house our souls does not need all the hair and the aggressiveness and other different character traits that Homo sapiens has, and that the folks that will inhabit Earth, the meek that will inherit the Earth, will have more of a need and more of an ability to be able to tap into past lives, and so supposedly they'll be able to do that. Anyway, Project Preserve Destiny was, at least on paper, a well-meaning effort to prepare for how we are going to survive, as if the aliens were telling us in a way that they weren't telling us the whole truth. They were not really informing Majestic that we are more like laboratory mice, that we're more of a garden, that Earth is more of a garden for the cultivation of souls. It has nothing to do with who they are. It has nothing to do with whether we're Americans or rich or powerful, or whether we're white, Anglo-Saxon, or Protestant, or believe in a God of this kind or that kind. It has to do with how we're spiritually alive. But without going into the details on it, suffice to say, those projects have been left in disrepute. And the bottom line to it is that the elite want to save their skins. They want to go to Mars. They want to go to the bases on the moon. They want to be able to escape what's coming, and they're not going to be allowed to. And most of the bases that were built underground, they're not going to be going down there because they've since learned, after building them and spending billions of dollars, raised mostly out of the sale of drugs, which is one of the reasons why drugs have been kept illegal, through the sales of oil, which is another reason why energy-saving devices, even if we can't have free energy, we can certainly have better energy than we do now, although they're playing catch-up now. But the point was that they needed to raise a lot of money in a short enough time to build these underground cities. So that was Preserve Destiny. But who is this group? That is what I wanted to finish talking about, because when we left it last week, I was mentioning that there were members of Majestic 12 that had, over time, different types of different positions on Majestic 12 were held by different people, usually in the power structure. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, the financial power. He is a member of Majestic 12, or whatever name you want to call it now. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military power. He is a member of Majestic 12. The chiefs of intelligence gathering, which is the signals intelligence community represented by the director of the NSA and the director of the CIA. Those are members of Majestic 12. The national security advisors, ranging from Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who are still, those two I believe are still on whatever incarnation of Majestic 12 is currently in power. The British representative, because of the special relationship that the United States and the United Kingdom have, is usually represented by the permanent Undersecretary of State for the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom. At the time that I was interacting with these members of the Committee of Majority and Majestic, that individual was Sir Kevin Tebbit. The current individual, I believe, is John Thompson, but I think they've also blurred the line so that the titles may not be reflected in the current lineup, because they know that after their interaction with myself and with other individuals in the truth-seeking community that they've had to reformulate their entire organizational structure, which is why the Majestic 12 that I had the pleasure or the pain of interacting with, if you want to put it either way, that adjournment took place in October 12th of 2005, and that group is no longer in power. So the individuals that hold those certain positions that I mentioned, along with the director of the National Institutes on Health, which I'm not sure of the current member. I think that Barnes Kelly or E. Kelly, and my memory escapes me sometimes, but they are listed on the danburisch.info site. Harold Barnes was the former director of the NIH, and then E. Kelly, I'm not certain about. Also, there were a number of alternates. Dr. Robert Gallo was one. Now, in order to understand which Majestic 12 story is real, there's some truth to almost every one of them. According to Nancy Leader of Zeta Talk, and she being the emissary of the good Zeta Reticulans, who can be as gruff and as nasty in many ways as anybody can be, yet they're still, at least allegedly, the good guys. They don't tell us what we want to hear. They didn't tell Majestic what they wanted to hear, but they told them the truth. Look, your kind is over. Get over it. The rich among you will have as hard a time to graduate to the next realm as a camel going through the eye of a needle, I think is a biblical phrase. That's pretty much how they look at it. But at the time, Nancy Leader had explained that there were two governing boards of 20 each for a total of 40. One board supposedly was comprised of a number of the more powerful people in the world that are not necessarily in positions of power in the way that I just outlined. Those are really kind of civil servants to the wealthy. But the real power, that would be those people that own and control most of the material wealth, the corporate wealth, the large companies that get all the defense contracts, that they're the real power in this world. Some would call a puppet master a Rothschild puppet master whose main home is in Switzerland, who is off the books, not registered at any hospital, so you can't track him down, really. And no, it's not the current Nathan Rothschild, but some would say he is the head of at least the former board of 20. He was a member of Majestic 12 at the time that JFK was killed.
And is this connected with Scion, or how closely connected is this? Or
yes, Scion is the name of the secret society, and I think I mentioned it in last week's interview that these were supposedly the members of the bloodline of Jesus Christ. Jesus and Mary Magdalene did have progeny. They did have children. These children then had children and so forth down the line. And the bloodline was known as the Merovingians, which is how the Merovingian in the movie The Matrix got his name. But yes, it was supposedly a real group, and that they had to divide from the Templars, the Knights Templar, because the Masons really were the resurrection of the Knights Templar. There was a grand cutting of the elm that separated the Knights Templar from the Priory of Sion, the Priory of Sion being made up of the members of the royal houses of Europe, just as was discovered by the friar in René Le Chateau at the turn of the previous century. And that may sound more of romantic, or what does this have to do with aliens? It has a lot to do with them. Because these are the people that really hide those secrets. If the world knew that Jesus and Mary had children, and this was commonly accepted amongst the masses of the world as it is amongst those who wield power, the world would probably be a different place. But nonetheless, this group, still maintaining its secrecy, and still comprised of the members of the royal houses of Europe, who were trying to make sure that they, no matter who was who, that they always intermarried and still retained control over these various countries in Europe. But that is one of the secret societies, along with the Knights of St. John, the Knights of Malta. These secret societies are the groups into which Majestic 12 was allegedly folded at the end of 2005. And as it was reported to me, they all fell to the secret societies. And with Marcia McDowell and Dan Burisch, now Dan Crane, both go, and along with Dadmiral and some of Dadmiral's people, and a member or two, in addition to Dadmiral, of Majestic 12, they went into Sion. Now, what Dan Burisch has recounted, when he was discovered about Sion, he made a play about Sion with S-C-I-O-N, meaning the offspring of the powerful, and he, being almost like a son to Dadmiral, chose to use that spelling to refer to the new group that maintained the actual control over the crashed UFOs, or they're really IACs, Identified Alien Craft. So remember, or the audience, I don't know how many in your audience will be are familiar with a lot of ufology lore and all of the different folklore associated with UFOs and aliens. But there are three groups of craft. There are UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And in fact, there's USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Then there are ARVs, which are alien it's not retrofitted, but recreated. Alien recreated vehicles, ARVs, which are craft that are modeled after UFOs, but they're made of terrestrial origin. So those are ARVs, and then you have IACs, which are identified alien craft, and those are craft where Majestic knows where they came from, which alien group gave them to us. Mm-hmm. So right there you have, 4 or 5 different types of what most people simply know as UFOs, because to them they're all unidentified. Mm-hmm. But anyway, somebody has to maintain control of them. Somebody has to maintain control of the facilities. And there is always going to be a group that is in charge, that was left in charge by the original commission of President Truman to establish Majestic 12 to study these objects, to figure out what the aliens were trying to do here, what they were all about. And that group would then be not only entrusted with the secrecy, but the power necessary to keep it secret. And in order to have that kind of power, you really have to have the most power of all, which is why Majestic 12 is at the capstone of the national security pyramid that I outlined in an earlier interview. Mm-hmm. That abstract organizational structure was really important, because anything that's found, such as the K-50 tanker that crash-landed at the end of the runway at Thule, Greenland in earlier 2000 or early 2001, it came straight out of 1949, out of the Bermuda Triangle, and immediately was had Majestic 12 had to hush it up, because any kind of paperwork, any kind of phenomenon that is of an unexplainable nature, anything like that goes to Majestic, and then orders are given. And I think I also explained in an earlier interview how people will and can be killed if they don't have that clearance, magic clearance. And Bill Cooper has written extensively on this, and I believe most of what he had to say about those documents' classification was more or less correct.
And how does this relate to Project Stormtide? Or would you not want to go there yet?
Well, Operation Stormtide, I'll explain about that, because as I was mentioning to you off the record earlier, it is kind of hard to speak about how I came to learn of Operation Stormtide without giving away the identity of my latest source, who I have not heard from in some time, and thus I feel that he may have been caught, may have been apprehended himself. And I would really feel bad about that, because it would just be but one more individual who may have met an early demise simply because of what he was attempting to do to give me information in order to help the people of Earth really understand what we're about to go through and how we are really literally on the doorstep of this, and how this is not something that it's not some lunatic fringe, some concoction. This is a real event. There's enough in the geologic record. There's enough in spiritual texts, in all the texts that are the clay cylinder seals. Even when I was over in Poland and found out that the Americans had been there 2 weeks prior to me arriving and had cleaned out all of the clay tablets and cylinder seals that were from Babylon. This was in early 2000. And I was mystified. They were too. They said, "We're very sorry. Your countrymen, the Americans, came and cleaned this room out, and we're not supposed to tell anybody." But I found out later they did that because they were really hard at work trying to plot the trajectory of Nibiru, because it had been spotted in December of 1983, and it had been its course had been carefully observed. NASA was sending up so many different craft that have been used to triangulate and to determine the speed with which it's been approaching. And now they can't really determine it because its speed has changed with the repulsion force of the sun interfering with it. And even though it was supposed to be here a few years ago, as it's been rounding the sun, they know it's there. It's in the inner solar system. And they're extremely anxious. And some of them, I don't know how they could survive the tension. It's hard enough for me to, and some of these people have known about it for many years. But in any case, Operation Stormtide was told to me by this latest source, who had come to know me after finding out from a rogue agent who had gone off the reservation, had been one of the people that had been securing these documents, which were then fed back to me, supposedly the pictures from the throne room where some of the child rituals, sacrifice of pedophilia that took place at the Mother of Darkness Castle, so forth and so on, and along with the faxed orders for the disclosure to the public of Dan Burisch's involvement, which, again, is another bamboozlement, because it was Majestic's way of saying, "Look, we're going to tell you, we're going to disclose to you the truth about this one alien that we kept at Area 51, which was true, but they're not going to tell you the other half of that. They just want you to know about the cute little alien, and this poor thing was suffering, and we're just trying to find a cure for it, and oh well." No, that's not the importance of the story. They like to put this issue of Nibiru and the pole shift on the back burner every time it pops its ugly head up. But that is the real important issue, because once you realize that the entire reality that we know of, this comfortable reality with all the advances being made in electronics, which thanks to Roswell, we have computers today, and yes, we could have developed them on our own. We were at the proper level of the development so that we could actually use these materials, and Majestic 12 did seed those elements, fiber optics, laser pointer, silicon carbide chips, a transistor, night vision scopes. All of those things were harvested from the Roswell craft, and we enjoy the benefits of that today, and they will be helpful to us. But the world we're about to enter into, the few of us that will survive this, will be bereft of all of that for about 100 years, during which time the transformation of this world will take place as it's being made ready for our replacement model of humanoid, what I call Homo reticulus, because it's an amalgamation of the best of human genetics and Zeta Reticulum genetics. Anyway, Operation Stormtide again, I wandered far afield from that, but Operation Stormtide was told to me by the source that learned from this rogue agent about me. Then he came to understand what was going on. Then, coincidentally, he was told that he had to take part in this thing called Operation Stormtide because he was a military man, and he was involved with special projects, I would say, something like Delta Force or the Navy SEALs would be in the United States. And, of course, he worked for NATO, I'll say that much. But their job on this particular mission, this Operation Stormtide, when it first took place in 2008, was to secure the safety of the 300 most prominent families in Brussels. But these were not just the families in Brussels. They were supposedly just 300 average families from an unknown province in Central Asia called Majestic, which was some imaginary country, and it was going to be attacked by mad Muslims, and they had to go in and rescue these families and get them to safety. That was the cover story. And in fact, even my source, who was, as a member of NATO, was briefed on some of the highest levels of awareness, and his beanbox was pretty high up. He wasn't even aware of it. I didn't even realize the importance of the very name Stormtide. But in 2008, when they first held their training exercises for Stormtide, they used Brussels, they used the suburb of Brussels to represent Majestic, and then the soldiers' own families were stand-ins for the family members of these 300 people, and they had to rescue them and get them to the central airfield, and from there they were whisked off to this special bunker complex, which was a renovated bunker complex from the World War II era. And the reason is because that they had learned that the deep underground bases that they activated thanks to the continuity government kickoff known as 9/11, one of its many functions was the kickoff of the continuity government scenario, was that there were mysterious gases at those depths. And not only that, the tectonic plate movements that are expected will probably crush those deeper bases. With the knowledge that they had gained in the recent years going up to 2008, they knew they had to do something for their most important people. And the 300 most important people in the European government, those people, and they include many of the members of Scion, because even without the royalty, the titles of royalty, these members that run Europe are parts of the European Commission, the European Union government. Mm-hmm. So the idea was to get them over to this bunker system so that they would be safe and sound. And I have pictures of this bunker system being renovated and tons of foodstuffs and emergency supplies going into the forest to this lone brick outhouse, and they would be disappearing down into this outhouse with hundreds of pallets stacked up outside. Hmm. Well, and as well as that, there were missile emplacements because they knew that if they were ever discovered, they could be overrun, and they had to protect themselves at all costs because this bunker complex is where the most powerful people in Europe are. That's their big hidey hole. Hmm. I don't intend to reveal the location of it, but I want the folks that are listening to this to understand how important it is for them to know that this is being done by the rich. And unless they want to die at the most convenient and earliest opportunity, then they should just walk away and laugh it off. But if the most powerful people are taking steps to protect themselves, it would behoove your listeners to do the same. And they are living near a coast as well. But what makes Stormtide even more interesting is what I'm about to tell you regarding the second replay of Operation Stormtide, which took place a couple of years later. Now you might ask, well, why did they have to replay it? What happened between 2008 and 2010? Well, it so happened that at the end of 2009, there was a scenario given that Nancy Leader explains on the Zeta Talk website, in which she is taken to meet with a number of other galactic visitors from many different planets, and they learn, or they show her, holographic images of what the Earth is about to go through, what it goes through every 3,657 years. And that in this holographic depiction, certain things in certain parts of Earth, the globe, of this planet, will occur, certain steps. Now, that has been ameliorated, as we found out later, by these large, mysterious metal boxes, which some of your audience may know of because they've been spotted near the northern California coast, near Crescent City, and in Oregon and off the coast of Washington State, and extending in the Pacific. And allegedly, they've been supposedly placed there by benevolent aliens to ameliorate the effects of the cataclysm, so that they're not going to be quite as bad. But in the late 2009, this was not known. What was known, or what was told to the audience of Zeta Talk, and believe me, Majestic 12 pays a lot of attention to whatever Zeta Talk says. In fact, you could even say that Zeta Talk is playing a major role in how foreign and domestic policy is being carried out even today. But at the time, when Zeta Talk said, or the Zetas explained to Nancy, that there would be an approximate 2-hour window between the ripping of the New Madrid zone down the center of the United States, when the Mississippi River is widened and the Great Lakes essentially dump into the floodplain of Texas, that when that happens, the resulting mega tsunami will slosh across the Atlantic Ocean, causing a storm tide of approximately 75 to 100 feet that would wipe out or wash over approximately 70% of Western Europe. Even if it then ran back out to sea, this would have a devastating effect. In fact, you can even find pictures showing very high-res representations of London underwater. Many in the audience might even have seen some of these pictures and said, "Oh, that looks interesting." Well, those pictures were produced based on what Zeta Talk was saying, but they will never admit that to you, of course. So don't even think that by saying, "Hey, did you draw this for that reason?" And, no, I was just told to do this. Had nothing to do with that's crazy alien talk. At least this is how they'll respond to it. But nonetheless, this huge storm tide was expected to do what I've just outlined. And Europeans were being told they had 2 hours in which they had to get their people to safety, because Brussels is not up in the mountains. And with those 300 most powerful families needing to be rescued, they were going to have to do something different. Now, even my friend who gave me this information, my source in NATO that told me about this, did not even know, because he never read Zeta Talk before I told him about it, and even then he tended to scoff at it. I explained that there was a reason for the redo of Operation Storm Tide, and that was because with only 2 hours, they knew that they would have to work a little bit faster than what the original operation had done, where they all went to a centralized airfield, that all the different family members were picked up by armed troops in armored vehicles, and then taken to the airfield and then flown up to where the bunkers were. Well, the redo, they were allowed half an hour, I believe it was, for these small helicopter pilots, or the pilots weren't small, maybe they were, but with these small helicopters, each one of them was responsible for a family. They had to get those families, and then they had a maximum of 2 hours to get them, or an hour and a half an hour to get to them, and then an hour and a half to get them up there to safety. So it was an entirely redone operation with entirely different directives, and he didn't understand why it was going to cost so much and why they had to all do it so quickly using all these helicopters when the first one seemed to have done everything, pretty well. Then I had to explain to him. The reason that they changed everything was because there was going to be a time limit. At least they were working with the 2-hour window that Zeta Talk had told them. That is one story that I think can help the people in your audience understand that when they hear about a pole shift, and they hear that an announcement is going to be made by the Obama administration that is going to undo 2 huge cover-ups. first of all, that there have been aliens communicating and interacting with elements within the secret government for a number of years, since the early 1950s, and in fact from the early 1940s, if not before. And that the reason that they are interacting with us has to do with this pole shift that's coming, and that they're going to have to take steps to get to safety. I believe that they will be given an option to go of their own accord to some of the larger farms, what some of the right wing might say are concentration camps, which they were intended to be back when certain people were in power. That's exactly what they were intended to be, were concentration camps where the activists would be sent to. But the barbed wire has been turned around and face the other direction, and these will be work camps for those that want to leave the cities where they're not going to be able to survive anyway, and to go to work on farms to help feed themselves and their families and the rest of the community. So that's one option that will be given. If you want to stay on the coast, it'll be your prerogative, but don't expect to be rescued when things start to happen. But in the meantime, those that are prepared for this, at least physically somewhat prepared, spiritually prepared or braced for this, and intellectually braced for it, they're going to be in a much better position. This is why I wanted to talk about where they can go. The folks from the Crescent City area, at any rate, can go for their safety. I think I should stop talking for a few minutes or a few seconds here while I catch my breath, and then you can ask me the next question. Did I answer that about storm tide, by the way? Yeah.
As well as you could, I'm imagining, without potentially putting yourself or more people at risk. So it sounds like, as so often is the case, that you were about to actually go where I was about to ask you. And that was, first the comment that the elite, as we've known for years through different rumors and actual evidence, have been preparing for ways of escape in relation to some kind of cataclysm. So my question was, how does all this relate to practical advice for the residents of Crescent City? But it sounds like, once again, you were just about to go there anyway.
Well, I felt that would be the next point at which the folks listening, well, if that's going to happen, well, what should I do? And of course, they probably have been familiar with the ready.gov ads that have been on the internet and even on some television stations. You might even see some of those commercials, which is that you should always have a bag packed and ready to go out the door. You should have an evacuation route already planned for, and a family plan for members of your family, so that everybody knows where to gather when they hear something, when an announcement comes their way, or when a severe event like a major earthquake has happened or is about to happen or whatever. And that's the first thing, of course, is to have, and I advise people to have about three months worth of non-perishable foods if they can. That way they don't have to worry about refrigeration, and they may be able to keep cans of food that would require some kind of heating. That would be one thing. But anything that could perish as a result of not being refrigerated, they don't want to focus on that. But to have about 3 months worth of food for each person is about reasonable. Now, I think the government is saying 3 weeks. The more the better, but I also want to caution people against hoarding. Number one, if you're too much of a hoarder, you're not going to be able to take it all with you anyway. And number two, if it's too large of a hoard, the government may end up confiscating some of it to help feed those that have not been told, that have not had the wherewithal, that have simply been living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, trying to play by the rules, and the elite have been planning on sacrificing them in the end anyway. So those elitists that may have thought they could get away with doing that, they may have some of those hoardings confiscated. So you want to try to strike a balance between having too much and having too little. That's one thing about food. Also, you don't know whether the area you're going to be in is going to be very cold or very hot or both, and within a week's time of each other, because as the temperature, climate can change and fluctuate wildly, you want to make sure you have a coat for the extreme cold, raincoat and boots if you have to go wading across small rivers or creeks. and also shorts and T-shirts for summer weather too, as well. You want to have something that you can use to light your path, like a lantern and flashlight and so forth. And in order to make sure that you have one that's going to work, you should get something with a hand crank on it, because that will help you. You won't have to worry about constantly recharging. In a town or even a state or a nation without any kind of power systems, power grid, you're going to have it anyway, because there won't be any place you can plug in and recharge it. That's gone. So, and if you have a generator, you may think that's going to save you, but if a generator requires gasoline, you better have a lot of small containers of gasoline set up. And I would advise people to have a 5-gallon safety gas can always tucked and always ready in your trunk, in your car, because if things happen and you try to go to the gas station, there's no power, there's not going to be any pumps, no pumping of gas. So you want to have enough to fill your tank, or at least to get you 100 to 400 miles radius. So if you can get a 100-mile radius, then you should be fine. Mm. That's as far as keeping the basic stuff that you can take with you. And then after that, of course, is the evacuation plan. And for the folks at Crescent City, I had been looking online, and I realized that there are a number of beautiful and very safe parks near where you all are. Namely, there's the Jedediah State Park, is, I think, the most well-known one right there. But as you continue along Route 199, further on, there are the Del Norte Coast Redwood State Park, Mill Creek Campgrounds, the Big Tree Wayside, the Brookings RV Park. Those are just some of them, but you want to get to an elevation that, if at all possible, is at least 675 to 700 feet above sea level. Mm-hmm. You want to be as far away from the coastline as possible. And I'm not sure about where the major fault lines, like the San Andreas and so forth, where they fit into in regards to where Crescent City is. Mm. But that's going to play another role, because even though the biggest and the first ripping of the North American continental plate is going to be at the New Madrid in the center of the country, that's near Memphis and St. Louis, it will be soon after that the San Andreas Fault and the other California faults are going to become effective, and they're going to go into action, as well as volcanoes. You'll have a lot of volcanic activity in volcanoes that are currently extinct. So you want to get as far away from the coast as possible, and you want to get at least, I would say, 700 feet above sea level, if at all possible. Be near something, a source of water, and you should be able to seek refuge in a state park or a national park, but you don't want to go there prematurely. Of course, if you have land in those areas, and friends with land in those areas, make sure you hold your friends close and closer than anybody you've been friends with before, because you might end up saving your life by going to those kinds of places. Mm-hmm. So those are the important things. You have an evacuation plan. You know that you need to be at a high enough elevation, and you know you want to be as inland as far as possible. You want to have non-perishable foodstuffs, and you want to be protected against the elements. I think those are the most, of course, a first aid kit, as well as having a light, a lantern, and a raincoat, and of course a pocket knife. You can go from there, but don't overwhelm yourself. There's a tendency people have to become survivalists, and most people simply can't do that. You know, they can go to the dollar store every payday and pick up a couple of cans of baked beans, a couple of cans of tuna, box of crackers. Those are things that are helpful. Peanut butter, honey, those are helpful. Other things that require refrigeration, I said, don't worry about those. The only things that you can take with you, freeze-dried foods, okay, that's good, it's great, but they are expensive too, and so they might be out of the reach of the average listener. Mm-hmm. Have I answered that question?
Yeah, actually, that's pretty good advice. I have a question for you, and I realize this is all subject to change, especially with the idea of, I think it was Project Looking Glass and timelines and different probable realities or whatever. But according to the information that you've gotten thus far, what's your time frame on this? And I know it's really, I'm thinking only a guess, because it's all subject to change. But what would you say in the next year, in the next 10 years? Can you really even pinpoint
here's
it
what
like
I
that?
know.
Yeah.
Right. This is important to know because I have already in the course of this show, and I think though at least one previous show, I have mentioned the name of Nancy Leader in Zeta Talk. Now, I want to use references to Zeta Talk in a very cautionary manner. And I say that because even though the scenario as depicted in Zeta Talk is crystal clear, and it is based on a truthful situation that is going to happen, anything to do with the timeline has been used to bamboozle the elitists, because right now, before the announcement that Obama's announcement team is going to make, before that time, anything that's related at all to timelines is going to be subject to revision and should be taken with a pound of salt, because it's basically there to bamboozle the elite. But people should be ready. That is the one constant theme, is to be ready yesterday if you can, but not to panic. Mm-hmm. So they had based the timeline of middle of May of 2003, based on an expected trajectory of Nibiru, which it did come into the inner solar system. At that time, there has been enough proof by both amateur astronomers and, of course, any professional astronomer. Well, you know that they're shackled. They're shackled and they're bound and gagged when it comes to talking about this stuff, even though they're going to haul them out and say, oh, that's all nonsense. Those are just doomsayers and pay no attention. Mm-hmm. Fact is, there are no such things as private planetariums or private astronomical observatories that are not controlled by the elite, either by majority of stockholders, the few that are not controlled outright by educational facilities, or they're controlled by the military, or, as I said, by the foundational grants of all these powerful poobahs, the Rockefeller this, the Carnegie that. You don't have an observatory that you can simply go up to and pay $1 and look through the scope and see Nibiru. You can't do that. For one thing, right now it's between us and the sun, and so the sun is going to blind any optical instruments. That doesn't mean you can't see it. It has been seen by lots of people here and there where it can get through the light at the right time for the deflection to be able to pick it up. Mm-hmm. So the point about the time frame is the middle of May was reasonable based on their own studies. Majestic realized that it was likely to come through at that time, had it not been for the repulsion force of the sun. And this is why the Zetas didn't manufacture that date. There was a basis in reality for that date. Mm-hmm. And knowing that date caused them to put in their plan of action, the theft of the presidency in 2000, so that by the time it came, they would be ready to go. This is also one of the reasons for the timing of the 9/11 events, because it would help them to secure an environment in which martial law was only a breath away. The Patriot Act had set that up. All of those events, as I mentioned earlier, shows the DC snipers are all tied in to that time and day, that time frame of middle of May of 2003. Mm-hmm. And in the documents that I referred to that were put out by Dr. Burisch, he was under pressure from the committee of the majority to finish his Lotus Protocol in time at March 15th of 2003. That day was chosen because that was 8 weeks away from the expected passage of Nibiru of May 15, 2003. And why would it be 8 weeks prior? Because it was supposedly 8 weeks prior to the passage that it would be seen in the sky by one and all. So they knew that they would have a situation on their hands where they would have to be basically keeping the entire population of Earth under their thumb, and they didn't want to have to add to that the delay on having these other projects, Project Preserve Destiny, having to wait on them to finish up before they could scurry off to their hidey holes in Colorado, which is where most of them will be going, the American elite, that is.
3 minutes.
And that's another reason why you have a lot of federal agencies that are going to be, that already have a headquarters in the Denver area, why there's so much office space that is rented by the federal government, because they expect to be making that their secondary capital, and eventually the main capital of whatever survives of the United States. Anyway, that has to do with the prior timeline mentioned in Zeta Talk by others. The next major time frame that was given by Zeta Talk mentions the end of 2010 and the beginning of 2011, and had not those mysterious metal boxes been placed there by order of the Council of Worlds. Now, this is allegedly what Zeta Talk has claimed, and I, for one, am not going to dispute the logic in that, because it certainly was logical. They had to keep the elite thinking that it was going to happen any day now, and they did that for almost an entire decade until recently. And when they realized that they were basically biding their time, getting Obama, making sure that he was on board, that he knew what he had to do. Putin knows this, and President Xi Jinping of China is also on board. The three of those three presidents will be making this announcement shortly, and most likely by the last weekend of February, which is only a little over a month away, Pleiades. And that's why this is such an important issue right now, because this decision was supposedly made back when President Obama and President Xi Jinping of China met in California, well, in your state there, on June 7th and 8th of 2013, last year. At that meeting, they had determined that they were going to make the announcement together after the harvest was in, 500 days hence, and the nearest weekend after that, they would make President Obama would go first to make the announcement. He has the hardest job.
And what is this announcement? I mean, what specifically is the announcement in about 30 seconds?
Okay. The announcement is very simply this. My friends and fellow countrymen, people of Earth, I'm here to tell you that aliens are real. We've been working with them, trying to get prepared and let you know. We didn't want to tell you the truth, so we made a ridiculous idea to even talk about it seriously. But time has come now to tell you the truth, because time is close at hand for a pole shift to occur. And it's going to be a very rough ride. Not everybody's going to die. At least 10% of the public will survive, which is why the Georgia Guidestones, by the way, have that figure of 500 million.
Yeah.
That's a specific reason, because those Georgia Guidestones, by the way, were financed by Majestic 12. But anyway, the announcement's not going to contain that detailed information about the Georgia Guidestones, but it's going to say, yes, we've been working with aliens. They're here to tell us. They've come here to tell us to get ready for this pole shift and to see what we can do to get our act together and to stop destroying the environment, because we're going to have to inherit it and clean it up, and don't leave it such a mess for us, because your current civilization is going to be pretty much wiped out. There'll be some of you left. It'll be like the Stone Age, and some of the good guys will be invited into the new high-tech cities that we're going to be building and stocking with hybrid bodies that we've been creating over these abductions.
Of time. We are all out of time once again. How do you feel about what you've shared here today? Do you feel like you would like to do another interview on any topics you haven't covered, or
right?
Where
well,
are you?
I think I finished. I think did I get that out? That the reason that you were going to have this lost weekend at the end of February, because most of the power players of Washington and the Northeast, Eastern establishment won't be able to move in the heavy winter snows. Everybody will have a chance to think about what they want to do and make their move accordingly. As long as I got to that point, at least I'll feel that I've made the most important contribution. Now, we can go back and fill in some of these areas that people are going to want to know.
Thank you for listening to The World According to Pleiades on KFUG Radio in Crescent City, California. If you have any topics you'd like covered, or you feel you have the potential to make a good interviewee, please send your suggestions and or information to KFUG Radio, 270 I Street, Crescent City, California, 95531. Attention, Pleiades. Or email me at radiointerview@moonstar-enterprises.com. That's radiointerview@moonstar-enterprises.com. My name is Pleiades Moonstar, and I love you.